Morning, eighth graders. Today is March 31st, 2020. I'm actually recording this on the evening of March 30th. Um, keep this a little bit short today, and hopefully the YouTube portion is going to work out for us. Good discussions today, or good attendance on Zoom. I really appreciate you guys showing up every day with a good attitude. Hang in there, stay busy, stay healthy. Today we're going to talk about briefly. We'll keep this short. This will be, I promise, a short one. Um, William Tecumseh Sherman's March to the Sea. So that's our goal. And by Tuesday morning, I will have dropped your study guide into Google Classroom for you to start working on. Um, do not submit it until and unless I give you directions to submit it. So when we talk next time, I expect I should be able to ask to see your study guide. I don't want to see it unless I ask to see it. So do not submit it, but you need to be working on it. So give yourself a goal. Maybe get 10 done. See how much homework you've got, but get to work on your study guide. So Sherman's March to the Sea, and start working on your study guide. So last time we talked, we were at Gettysburg, and we talked specifically, especially in our Zoom, about the Gettysburg Address. And you watched a video about the Gettysburg Address, and we figured out that a score is 20 years, and four score and seven. It's like doing algebra and history classes, 87 years, which leads us back to the American Revolution. So Abraham Lincoln used very flowery speech. Well, shortly after the fall of Gettysburg, or after victory at Gettysburg, um, Lincoln decides it's time to put Grant in command of the Army of the Potomac. Grant has captured the Mississippi River. He's done out west. That one part of the three-part plan of the Union to win the war was over. So now he takes Grant from out west on the Mississippi River and brings him east to work on defeating Lee. He's really worked hard to find the man to do the job. So remember from when we were actually together in school, uh, Lincoln really has to search for the right guy for the job. So he goes through McDowell, then he goes to McClellan, then a guy named Pope, and then a guy named McClellan, same guy, and then a guy named Burnsides, and then a guy named Hooker, and a guy named Meade, the guy that looked like Kermit the Frog that you saw in the Gettysburg slide, and then now Grant. So there's seven different men, eight different generals, or starting quarterbacks if we're using a football analogy. So Sherman, he has kind of an interesting background, probably not really that interesting compared to some of the characters we've looked at, but he was born in a wealthy family. He had privilege, so he had education. He had some things that maybe Grant didn't have available. Maybe Lee did. All these men are a little bit different, but eight children, which wouldn't have been unusual for that time, and they're from Louisiana. Um, his father passed away, died when he was 9 years old. So William Tecumseh Sherman was actually raised by a neighbor. Um, that'd be horrifying to me if one of my closest neighbors had to take care of me, Nate. I'm not sure how I would handle that. I guess maybe he'd take good care of me, takes good care of his sheep. Um, so he went to the military academy, but discipline wasn't necessarily William Sherman's top priority at the military academy. He had 150 demerits in 1 year. And those demerits, if you remember, we talked briefly about this. A demerit is like a punishment, something simple. So if at school we have a no chewing gum policy and you're caught chewing gum, you might receive a demerit for that. Or if you show up late for class 2 minutes because you were in the bathroom too long, you might receive a demerit for that. So he dropped to sixth in his class because of that. And when he got out, he really wanted to serve under Grant. When the war started, Sherman was over anxious and really thought that the Union would kick the snot out of the Confederacy. Remember, this guy's from Louisiana, but he's fighting for the Union. Um, and then as the war kind of progressed, Sherman went into a funk, sort of a depression, um, and really wanted to go where the winning was. And if you remember, he's got a couple of famous quotes, but he's the one after, I think it was the Battle of Shiloh, that said the scene at this battle would have cured anybody of war. And later on, maybe even a more famous quote, war is hell. So Sherman didn't love war, but he was a really good soldier, and he wasn't afraid to put it on someone if he had to. Um, and his stance on slavery, being from Louisiana, he sympathized with slavery, which means he didn't dislike slavery, but he opposed secession. So, again, if we're going way back to the beginning, when I tried convincing you that the Civil War wasn't just about the slavery, the issue of slavery, I guess maybe that's more evidence there. You've got one of the big generals who doesn't dislike slavery. He's not a fan, he just doesn't dislike it. But he doesn't think the southern states should have seceded. So he goes to fight for the Union. Now, by 1864, this is a big year, by the way. It's a presidential election year. Remember, Lincoln was elected in 1860, so it's time to run for re-election. And Lincoln's probably going to do okay, but he's running against George McClellan, one of his old generals, the guy that he put in charge twice. They didn't really get along all that well. Um, so Sherman goes to Grant with kind of a wild idea. And Grant takes it to Lincoln, and Grant and Lincoln both sort of agreed that this was silly. William Tecumseh Sherman says to Grant, let me take 60,000 men, about 62,000 soldiers, and I'm going to march deep into the heart of the Confederacy. And I'll show you the path that he takes on his march to the sea on a slide coming up in just a minute. He's going to march all the way into the heart of the Confederacy, not on the fringe, not on the edge. He's going to kind of skirt around where the most powerful Confederate armies are. In fact, he's going to meet up a resistance of about 13,000 Confederate troops. That's all. But here's the difficult part. It's not fighting battles in the Confederacy. It's living off the land with 60,000 men. Imagine how much food 60,000 men consume in a day, and how much ammunition and guns and wagon loads of supplies and cannon and all of the stuff the 60,000 men need, marching day after day in a 60-mile wide swath, 300 miles long, into the heart of the Confederacy. Grant and Lincoln both say, no, you're nuts. And Sherman basically whines and complains and begs at him, let me try it. What have you got to lose? I can end this war. He tells Lincoln, I can win you re-election. And he's kind of credited in history with helping Lincoln win re-election, but he doesn't do a whole lot of his action until late in 1864. So Sherman's march to the sea really did not have anything to do with Lincoln being reelected, but it sure didn't hurt that people in the North knew that there was this, we call it today, a scorched earth policy. So when Sherman would march past a Confederate cotton plantation, if the cotton hadn't been harvested yet, he set it on fire. If he marched past a cotton plantation and the cotton had been harvested, he stole it and shipped it north for the Union to use. Same thing with tobacco plantations. When he marched through a plantation, he'd oftentimes steal all the livestock to feed his men. Again, they had to live off of what they could find. So if a plantation had 10 cows and 10 hogs, they ate them. If they had a garden, they consumed it. If there was food in the house, they ate it. Then they burned the house down and sent the Confederates or the Confederate sympathizers on the run. Everything in their path was completely destroyed. So if you knew Sherman was headed towards you, you best get out of the way. And in the process, one thing that Sherman didn't take into consideration as his men were having some success living off the land was the fact that every time he marched across the plantation, those freed men, ex-slaves, because now they're freed men, followed him. So by the time Grant gets going, he's got tens of thousands of blacks, freedmen, just following the Union Army. They've got no place to go, and they don't know where to go if they had a place. So early on in his swath through, he captures and burns the city of Atlanta. Then he sends a messenger to Abraham Lincoln, and he tells him that he will be happy to provide him with Savannah as a Christmas gift. So by December 21st, he sends a telegraph to Abraham Lincoln. He says, I beg to you as a Christmas gift the capture of Savannah, Georgia, with 150 guns, that's cannon, and plenty of ammunition, and also 25,000 bales of cotton. So, what better gift could a president ask than one of his great generals in the South just completely breaking the back of the Confederacy and demoralizing what's left of support from Southerners who weren't in the fight? So, uh, this wasn't originally one of the parts of the strategy for the Union. They were supposed to be fighting around Richmond, and as a result, the Confederates weren't able to defend their territory, and Sherman had success marching through and destroying two major cities in Georgia and capturing both of them and looting them, taking what they could. So these are old cities and a lot of destruction. So you can see here, this is William Tecumseh Sherman, probably why he got so many demerits. His clothes are wrinkled, he needs to shave, his hair's a mess. He just looks crabby. You probably don't want to go up and tickle him. He'll probably punch you in the nose. But here's his path from Atlanta to Savannah. So he splits his army, and this causes them to do more and greater destruction. And then he marches north to Columbia, South Carolina. And then from there, he's going to head up from the south toward Richmond. So he and Grant are going to be able to eventually converge. Grant coming from up here from the north, and Sherman coming from the south to converge on Lee's position and hopefully finish off the Confederates with this attack. So, as crazy as it might have seemed to take 62,000 men all the way from up here in Tennessee, all the way through the state of Georgia for 300 miles, living only off of what they could carry and what they could find on the land, as crazy as that might have seemed, it was a stroke of genius that might have helped the Union win the war. You also see images of this if you've ever watched the classic movie Gone with the Wind, which is one of the oldest colored motion pictures that exists. It's kind of a Southern sympathizer romantic movie, and you see the burning of Atlanta in that movie. They also did this. This is kind of fun. What Sherman's men would do when they would march across a Confederate railroad is they would pull up the tracks and throw them off to the side. Well, within a matter of hours, or maybe within a matter of days, the Confederates would come through and put the tracks back up. So Sherman would order his men, after they figured this out, to take these tracks and hold them over a fire with a bellows being a thing to puff air onto it, and they would heat it up in the center of the track until it was molten red hot, and then several men would grab the ends of it, pick it up, and they would run it headlong into a tree or a stump of some sort. And in some places in the South, I've heard this. I've never actually seen a picture, but I've heard stories that they have trees where there are railroad ties wrapped around them. This renders this railroad track completely useless because you can't bend it straight. It's warped, and the Confederacy had no access to steel mills to get more steel. So these Sherman's bow ties or Sherman's neckties were total destruction. The railroads were done in the Confederacy because of this. Pretty genius of them, and not too difficult to repair once this war is over, because that's also a consideration at this point. Once it becomes clearer that the war is going to end eventually, probably sooner rather than later, both sides are going to have to figure out how to start healing this, which is where chapter 18 is going to take us. And here you just see some more of the damage and destruction that's caused in the wake of Sherman's march. The whole house is gone except for here's the fireplace with the cook stove on it, and must have been the two-story house with a fireplace probably in a bedroom up here. Kind of a cool picture. And that'll lead us into tomorrow's discussion of Grant in Virginia pursuing Lee. So today's discussion, William Tecumseh Sherman defeating the Confederates, marching through. Most of the Confederates weren't here to defend this. Most of the Confederates are up here near Richmond, Virginia, this past North Carolina, up here past where my pointer can go, defending Richmond. And their numbers were shrinking, and Lee was getting tired, and Lee had already offered his resignation to Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, twice, and was told no. So the Confederates were weakening as time went on, which allowed the honey badger of all the generals in the Union Army to do what he did. You guys have a great day. Watch the video. Remember, work on your study guide. Enjoy your time. Should be a nice day today. Get outside.